Welcome to The Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. Hi, I'm Bela and Mike, coming to you from the Capital Region campus of Clarkson University in Schenectady, New York. I'm a former three-time entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and now the David D. Ray Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship here at Clarkson University.
And coming to you from beautiful Münster, Germany, I'm Mike Wasserman, Professor of International Management at the Münster University of Applied Sciences. First, we want to thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoy listening to our podcast as much as we enjoy making it. Second, several of you always ask me, why the heck are we doing this? And I answer, it's certainly not to make money. But I do like to point out that both Bela and I like to learn from smart and interesting people about how the world is changing, and particularly how innovation and entrepreneurship are changing. We overlay our observations and compare them with the lessons that we've each learned over 3+ decades as entrepreneurs, investors, managers, and professors. To do this, we've decided to put together our network of interesting friends, former students, and business partners, along with others we've recently met along the way. And we'd like to bring you interesting stories, ideas, and insights into innovation, entrepreneurship, and the people that take unconventional paths to find happiness at work and in life.
Before we get today's guest, a quick thank you to our sponsors, Clarkson University
and the Münster University of Applied Sciences. Bela, we received a very thoughtful email from a listener, Sean. He had some very nice comments regarding the podcast and some suggestions, which we're always glad to hear. And I thought it might be cool if I read a little bit of Sean's email. Sean says, "Hi, Bela and Mike. I've really enjoyed the podcast as it grows and matures. Thank you for making it." Some comments. Mini-casts. Like many, I've oversubscribed to lengthy podcasts, and your short 10-minute reflections are a great relief that still provide meaningful insights. It might be worth using these as callbacks or check-ins with past interviewees to see where they are now and what recent challenges they've encountered. Second, cocktail question. Starting the interview, allowing the interview to describe themselves casually sets the tone and frames themselves, which is great because the journey they are all on is so very personal. Sean pointed out the podcast with Mark Campo and President Collins as two that he really enjoyed. He said, Tony's strategic vision and Mark's personal reflections were treats that brought to life perspectives and understandings that were previously unknown. Sean thirdly pointed out he liked the book and podcast recommendations and our personal reflections. He said, learning more about the podcasters is a significant driver of engagement and interest by a podcast listener. It might even be worth marking significant milestones with self-interviews of each other focused on specific sections of your careers and how they impact you today. Bela, we were just talking about that, weren't we?
Yeah, we were. We were thinking of doing a podcast where we interview each other.
I think so. Sean, this is a good idea. We'll jump on this. And then Sean concludes, the podcast has caused me to reflect on my own relationships and realize I'm surrounded by entrepreneurs. But in deeper reflection, I imagine we're all surrounded by people that challenge, inspire, and push the understanding of what work means. That was a wonderful email. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, hey, we really appreciate getting emails like that. And Sean's was especially thoughtful and had some great suggestions. So those of you who might have some thoughts and some suggestions, please feel free to reach out and email us. And we really like getting those, and they help us improve the podcast. It's always good to hear what our listeners are thinking. And hey, Mike, you want to tell folks what our email address is?
bela.and.mike@gmail.com. And remember, Bela is B-E-L-A and Mike is M-I-K-E. Bela.and.mike@gmail.com. You got it? Good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We look forward to hearing from you. So today's guest is Nick Petros. He has an interesting background as a competitive sailor, musician, and entrepreneur. And I think in my conversation with him, he shares some of that journey that he's been on and how he's learned from each element of it. His company, PinchForth, helps other companies connect with and grow their customer base. Hey, Mike, what caught your ear during the interview with Nick?
Well, this was cool. I mean, an interesting person with an interesting path. And I love how he kind of started and did that time. It's working for his uncle's air conditioning firm, right? Just being a laborer. And really, I always think it's cool when people start by doing jobs that require common sense and hard work. And even though you went to college doesn't mean that you can't or you shouldn't roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty. So I have a ton of respect for that path, and I think it's underappreciated and cool. Second, I really think it's neat how he used some of his failures early on and turned them into positives in his career. And he's kind of like a meta entrepreneur in the fact that he's an entrepreneur that helps other entrepreneurs be more entrepreneurial and be more successful at that. So I thought that's kind of a neat way to take your life lessons and turn it into ways that can give back. Obviously, it's lucrative for him, but it's rewarding. Like you said, he thinks he's got the best job in the world, and I'll argue that I have the best job in the world, but that's a great argument to have. But he's doing things that help people, which I think is really cool. So yeah, I thought it was great.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. So let's jump right into the interview with Nick Petros. Hi, folks. Bela here. Today, I'm here with Nick Petros, a real interesting entrepreneur who has started a company and has a very intriguing background that we'll talk to him about. And so welcome all of our listeners, and hope you enjoy this interview and conversation with Nick. So welcome, Nick.
Welcome. Excited to be here.
So, Nick, let me ask you a question. If you're at a networking event, which all entrepreneurs go to, so if you're at a networking event and you walk up and you shake someone's hand, how do you introduce yourself? What do you say that you do?
Sure. I say I help folks figure out how to grow their business and scale customer or user adoption. So that's true. A couple of different things. I have a couple of businesses going simultaneously now, but that's usually my intro, and I try to figure out what they're working on as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So when they say, okay, well, what do you mean by that, Nick? What do you mean by help me grow my business?
Yeah, sure. So I play in the technology space. My focus is primarily consumer-facing tech or business-to-business tech. And everyone's looking for a way to reach more people, onboard more customers. If you're consumer-facing, onboard more users, drive adoption and retention, that sort of thing. So scale in the technology space is anything you need to do to drive like regular increases, amongst the key performance indicators across those metrics. So that's what I do to help. That's where I play, and that's what I mean by growth.
Got it. So what's your typical customer look like, Nick?
They're all over the place. So if you're to ask the other question, how do you like your job? I think I have the coolest job in the world because one, I get to build new things, but two, I get to work on a variety of things with some really, really incredible people. So I have consumer-facing products that I'm working on, some that are just peer-to-peer, new ways for end consumers to share information amongst each other. I have products in the financial space, trying to revolutionize the banking sphere. I have physical products, athletic wear products, all different types of things delivered through technology. So I get to solve a myriad of different problems every day and week, and learn a lot in the process.
Wow. So I know this question will be like, asking someone who their favorite child is. But can you give us a more specific example of one of these products or services that you have?
Yeah, for sure. So I have a really cool product in the banking sphere. I don't want to name them, so we don't know that I'm behind part of it. But they figured out a way to make banking exciting. And what does that mean, right? Everyone knows, checking fees, rewards, points, free ATMs, like the generic bullet points that banks use to drive adoption. But these guys actually built an entire engagement platform on top of the banking sphere to make it practical to certain family activities. So instead of thinking about your bank as a place to just store your money and have it when you need it, these guys created an awesome interface that turns your bank effectively into a way to communicate different tasks inside of your own household. So it brings something that's sort of obscure and not exciting into a very exciting sphere that's practical to nearly every consumer that's a family. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, what you described to me, I was thinking about it as you were saying it, is that I'm really engaged now with that bank, right? It's much more, previously it's sort of a transactional relationship. Yeah. But now what you're talking about is we're sort of partners in this. I've invited the bank into my home. Yep.
There's a new way to use them. There's a new reason to use them. And it's cool. I mean, it's an exciting product. It's a huge space, but what we're talking about now, this is really growth. This is the sort of thing that I get to do every day, like figure out a way to get customers to engage, just like we're talking about with banks, with all the products that we work on. So it's more than just a transactional relationship.
Yeah, yeah. So how old is this company, PinchForth?
Sure. So started in November of 2017. So what are we, like a year and a half now?
Yeah, yeah. Very nice. So let's take a step back. Let's talk a little bit about how you got here. So where did you grow up?
Sure. I grew up in Narragansett, Rhode Island, on the bay.
Yeah. Wow. My son lives in Barrington.
There you go. Other end of the state, but it's a quick drive because it's Rhode Island.
Right. Right. Very nice. And what about your parents? Were they entrepreneurs or?
No. So my father's in professional services. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. He got an air conditioning company started in the 50s, actually, and grew it into a pretty substantial business that my uncle now runs today. Ironically, that was actually my first job out of school. I wanted to work as a copywriter, but didn't have the book of business or the creative background to land a job there.
Yes.
So I wound up working for him as a laborer for 6 months, which was a great experience.
Yeah, yeah, and high school. What'd you study? Like pre-college stuff, or what? Tell me a little bit about your educational background.
Sure. So generic pre-college stuff. I mean, we can actually step back a little earlier. I got involved in robotics at a pretty young age. 5th grade, my teacher was involved in a program out of MIT that was actually working on the beta for what's now the Lego Mindstorms program. If you're familiar with Legos or these like cool computer devices that can actually like power different motors and sensors on like mini robots that you can make with their kits. So I was working on like the MIT beta version of that before it was publicly released by Lego, and we were kind of like a test pool there. And that's kind of where the whole entrepreneurship thing got started. We built a pretty compelling robot. His name was Sammy the Salamander. It was on national television because we figured out how to program it to follow a track and go hide in its cave and open its mouth and do all kinds of things that 10-year-olds weren't expected to be able to make robots do. And that opened my eyes to the possibility of building something new, which has been kind of the mission ever since.
Yeah, wow. That sounds like it was really quite the experience.
Yeah, it was a great learning experience. It was awesome to see that, even though there aren't rule books for certain things, you can still forge a way ahead.
Right. Now, and then what transpired after that?
Sure. So, that sort of begun the quest to build something awesome. I'm sure not all that dissimilar from your background. You just a couple exits ahead of me at this point. After robotics, getting into high school, a couple friends spent like a year and a half working on an alternative energy project, trying to figure out a way to convert combustion engines into electric. We thought we had a pretty compelling idea. We actually tried to raise money for it too from family and friends, but no one believed we could do it. So that didn't ever get off the ground. Then in school and college, focus shifted to music. I've been playing music since I was 3 or 4 years old. So we pulled a band together and also tried to turn that into a business, like reached out to record labels like everyone else. There was some interest, but that didn't get off the ground. Out of school, as I mentioned, I worked as a laborer while I was trying to get jobs with creative companies up in Boston, and eventually landed a gig with an e-commerce company up here. They were launching a daily deal site. This is back in 2010 when Groupon wasn't widely known. So I was employee number 4 on that deal site project. Wound up getting pulled over into the growth and digital marketing side of things, and stood up a multi-million-dollar revenue channel in like 8 months, and helped that company exit. So then I finally kind of saw the light, and I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, wow. So let me go back to the that internal combustion engine one that you didn't raise money for,
Yeah.
and then the band that you didn't get signed for. So I always like to explore sort of what things do we learn from those experiences.
Yeah. So a couple of things. I think with the engine, for example, the logic all made sense. The designs made sense. One of the guys who was supporting the infrastructure is now in Seattle, working on ultracapacitors, like rapid release electronic storage devices. So he's actually in the space and validated a lot of the ideas that we had. But the big hurdle there was access to capital. If you don't have some money to put the idea together, which we didn't as high school kids, there's no way to really validate the concept. And transparently, I've carried that into basically everything else that we've done. Whether it was the band or the startups we've worked on since then. Finding a way to validate ideas, even like with a small amount of capital, has helped them grow a lot faster and figure out if they're viable a little faster.
Right. So that's sort of the notion of, minimum viable product or kind of lean startup, right?
Yeah. Just need some kind of nudge to turn that into more than just an idea or a vision.
Yeah. And then that nudge is also oftentimes helpful to raise capital.
Yep.
Because it gives the potential investors a little more confidence that what you have is real or it's going to work or there's market interest.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what we do today at PinchForth. Folks come to us with amazing ideas and, they don't necessarily have access to capital, but usually there are a couple little nuggets they can go after for $500 or $1,000. Build up a wait list, prove the consumers will adopt your idea, or even onboard one beta customer at the idea level, just to approach investors with more than just, I think this will work.
Right. And I think that's a really, really important concept that more and more people are beginning to understand. And, with certain businesses that you're going to start, they require a lot of capital. They're just capital intensive to kind of get going. So you got to figure out a way of sort of helping reduce the risk for the potential investor by, even if it's just one customer or it's a breadboard design or whatever, something that sort of demonstrates that you got something that's valuable.
Yeah. What's really fascinating. So I was just up in Toronto at a really big tech conference. What's fascinating, folks are building things so quickly these days that some of them, I must have talked to a handful of early stage companies that don't have enough to get an MVP out the door, but they have enough experience, and background in their particular area, artificial intelligence being a huge one, to actually onboard beta customers to help and actually fund their MVP that way. So these guys are coming into fundraising conversations with a revenue stream and a minimal viable product and a customer base, which is super exciting.
Yeah. Excellent. So PinchForth. So what does that mean? That sounds like a name of a company that has some deeper meaning to it.
Yeah. So there's a little story behind it. The last company I was at full time was called Rally Point. It's a vertical network for service members and veterans of the U.S. military. And that was a really, really wild experience. I came on board when they had like 150,000 users. They spent a couple $1 million building the product and getting it out the door, but they didn't have a really stable, repeatable way to grow super quick. And so that's what I came in to help them do. And we blew that up. It's like the largest and fastest growing military network in the world today. We grew it super fast, acquired a massive percentage of the active military, and now it's shifted to veterans primarily. And we did all of it without any brand work. We never really focused on developing the key brand tenets, explaining the name, going public in a big way with a refined identity. So the joke always became like, hey, we have access to the top of our industry, but no one really knows how to explain the brand in one sentence. We have millions of users on the site, and no one can really explain it in a coin level. Like, it's still creating value even though the brand isn't solidified. So when I started consulting, I wanted to come up with a name that, was, provocative enough to never actually take off at a brand level. And that's where PinchForth kind of came from. It's a combination of a sailing tactic called pinching, and forth, like go forward, grow faster.
Right. So are you a sailor?
Yeah. I was a pretty competitive sailor in high school. I've been meaning to get back into it since post-grad, but it's been all work.
Yeah. So did you, it was mainly sailing competitively?
Yeah, a lot of fleet racing, tons of team racing in high school, a lot of fleet racing over the summers.
Oh, okay. On Narragansett Bay mostly?
Yeah, it's a great place to sail, a lot of wind, a lot of space. Yeah. You sail too, right?
I do. So I've been at not the competitive level, but at the sort of recreational cruising piece. And my big trips were last summer. I helped a friend of mine bought a sailboat who had never sailed before and didn't know anything about sailing. And he bought it in Florida and wanted to get it up to Newport. So last summer, him and I and his son sailed it from Fort Lauderdale up to Annapolis, where he had some work done on it this past winter. And several weeks ago, brought the boat from Annapolis up to Newport. So that was kind of my big, quote-unquote, ocean experience, although to real ocean sailors, they would not consider that to be an ocean experience. But when I can't see land, I'm in the middle of the ocean as far as I'm concerned.
Still, that's a substantial trip. I mean, how long did it take to get to Annapolis?
So Fort Lauderdale to Annapolis was about 8 or 9 days, if I remember correctly. We did some of it on the ICW, the Intercoastal Waterway, which is a canal that basically goes from Florida all the way to Virginia. And we did a total of 3 overnights out in the middle of, not in the middle, offshore. We did one 48-hour stint and one 24-hour stint.
And you were under sail the whole way, or power?
When you're coming up the ICW, you're powering for the most part. There's a couple of places in the ICW that open up into bigger bodies of water that you can sail on. And when we were offshore, we were doing some sailing and some motoring, just because we didn't have enough wind. But yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed it. And this past couple weeks ago, saw my first whale, which was really exciting. A classic image that you see on TV all the time of a whale coming up out of the water and, slamming down on its belly.
Wow.
And it was probably 50 yards from the boat.
Super close.
Which, yeah, it was like, holy cow, that whale is big.
Yeah. And
anyway,
they don't mind. You're not making a lot of noise. They don't mind.
Right. So you have to go cruising sometime. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful sport. I think tying it back to growth, it's one of the few things where when you're underway, you can actually how you can look at the water and see where the wind changes, weight or direction a little bit.
That's right.
And then if you happen to maneuver your boat into that, usually it's a gray patch or a dark patch, it's like immediately realized benefit. And the second your sails touch that wind, you feel a difference. You move faster. You change direction. It's one of the few things where there's like immediate gratification for the right decisions, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I never thought of sailing this way, but you got to plan what you're doing. You got to manage your resources, and you got to be ready for the unexpected, because you never know what's going to happen. So in many ways, it has some analogies or parallels to starting a business and having limited resources. You got to figure out how you're going to live on what you have on the boat for the next 10 days, and if a storm comes up, a storm comes up, and you got to figure out how to deal with it. So
yeah. With a racing scenario, so it's almost even closer in a racing scenario, fleet racing in particular. You're all starting like gunning for the windward mark in most cases, and you have exactly the same resources as another like 60 to 100 boats. So exact
Right.
same resources, same distance. It's up to you to make the right decisions with the time you have. Try to eke out a little bit of an advantage,
Right.
which I feel like is the startup run.
Yeah, you really, in that kind of competitive selling, you're really adding that competitive piece of business to it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So where'd you go to? Did you go to college, and where?
Yeah, I went to Hobart, so upstate, not too far from you.
Yeah. And what'd you major in there, Nick?
I studied social science and Spanish.
Oh, okay, excellent. And then after college, what did you do?
Yeah, so I got that job as a laborer for my uncle for 6 months, where I just interviewed like crazy. Then wound up working for that e-commerce company. Switched from sales to growth. Stood up a big revenue channel, helped them exit, and I've been doing the venture-backed startup thing ever since.
Yeah. Now, did you consider at all joining a larger company right after school?
I thought about it. I was looking at ad agencies, but I graduated in '09 and didn't have much of a resume. Just a couple internships. Not a lot of ambition. So sales seemed to be the easiest fit, and that's where I got in first.
Right. Excellent. And so you said these were venture-backed, a couple of the things that you've done. So talk to us a little bit about that experience, the experience of kind of raising money from venture capitalists or, not friends and family, but kind of professional investors.
Yeah. So it's about different milestones. It's just like anything else you do, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And, part of the beauty of what I get to do at PinchForth is, I really get to work with some of the most talented people in Boston. Some unbelievable fundraisers, and you can almost actually like plan your fundraising round around the goal set that you think you're able to achieve, in the timeline you think you can hit, which makes things a lot easier. You come in with a data set that works, but it's a variety. So that first company, I was not really involved at all. I was actually powering the revenue curve, and my boss showed me the deck that helped support the acquisition of the company, and the curve mapped almost directly to what I was responsible for. So that was my first exposure to it. Then I moved to a payment tech company, which was much more focused. I helped put together a growth plan, helped validate acquisition costs, figured out how to tie like lifetime value of an expected customer to projected value of the business. How to position all that, to make it attractive, make it believable and attractive to investors, which only escalated when we got to Rally Point. Helping folks map a growth path that is attractive to investors. And, then beyond, just this past year, we helped 3 companies raise $4 million at the pre-seed stage, just by putting together a compelling, believable growth story.
That's really interesting. You used the word believable because in my entrepreneurship class, one of the exercises we do is all around making it believable, and everyone knows that your business plan or your deck, that's not what's going to happen, but potential investors just have to believe that it can happen. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think entrepreneurs or people who are pitching VCs lose sight of that fact. Mm-hmm. They start talking about, well, we're going to be a $3 billion a year business, in 19 months, et cetera. And you just took all the believability out of it.
Yeah.
And so you gotta walk that tightrope of growing fast and growing big and making it attractive to a venture investor. But at the same time, you got to make it believable. So I'm a firm. Now this is going to sound like a real bad pun. I'm a firm believer in making it believable.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think for a lot of the super early stage founders that we talk to, there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to raising capital. So it's easier or more comfortable to fall into the logical argument that. If this investment means access to a multi-trillion-dollar market, then I'm going to attract the most investors that way. But I think to what you're saying, like investors want to bet on something that could come to life.
That's right.
Playing the odds, 1 out of every 10 actually hitting. Like, you want to put those 10 investments into the companies most likely to hit in some capacity, not necessarily the biggest.
Now, do you do most of your work with relatively young startup businesses, Nick?
Yeah, I'd say like 80% with young businesses, 20% working with older businesses that know there's more they can be doing, but haven't been in that growth stage in a couple of years. So they're trying to diversify and lean on the startup guy to help them figure out a new way to break through and hit that next level.
Right. So talk to me about what a typical engagement is like with one of these folks.
So that's also the beauty of the job I get to have. They're all completely different. The one similarity, the one anchor point is there's always a specific problem. So that, like a professional services company, for example, maybe the average customer is worth $40,000 or $50,000, and they want to figure out a way to onboard more of them. And this is something I'm actually seeing, and you've probably seen with your companies, but I'm seeing very, very frequently these days. Folks know how to acquire leads, they know how to turn them into business. With the larger companies, that's a bigger problem. Like, how do we convert inbound demand and actual leads into something meaningful, faster without just hiring more people to qualify those. So, to give you the spectrum of what an engagement looks like, and on one case, I'll work with a large team of qualifiers, appointment setters, and sales folks, and turning that inbound volume into like measurable business. On the other hand, I'll work with a really small team of 1 to 3 early stage founders, and to validate their concept, and get it to a level that supports their next capital raise. So it's really a gamut. It depends on the goal, and we employ whatever we can to achieve the goal as efficiently as possible.
Right. So, what criteria do you use to decide whether you're going to work with a company or not?
Sure. So it ties back into your investment criteria. Believability. I think there are lots of people with amazing ideas, and it's really easy to get caught up in what the ideas could be, but few folks who can actually see a path to bringing those to light. So if the founder can see the next stage of a business, or the first stage of the business, if they're just getting it off the ground, in a way that makes sense, in a way that's practical and realistic, then there's, almost no reason not to engage, because we can practically find a solution. On the flip side, I think there's a lot of folks, and, part of my growing pains last year was working with too many of these, who think that just because the idea is good, it's going to grow really fast, which is never the case. People look at Facebook or watch the movie, the social network, and think that if you make the right idea, 1 billion people are going to use it at the end of the year. But those are accidents. Those things don't really happen often. The companies that grow really big are methodical. They test quickly and efficiently. They believe in data. They follow data, and they have a system in place to react to thousands of data points quickly to get them there. So folks who know that and understand the work required, and can see a realistic path, are awesome guys to work with. I wind up learning the most from them.
Yeah. So let's talk about data for a little bit. Do you help companies sort through that and figure out what to do with the data? These days it's so easy to collect so much data. Mm-hmm. And I see oftentimes companies submerge themselves or sink themselves with just so much data. And how do you help companies do that, or is that really outside of your space?
Yeah, no, I mean we help folks measure. I think that's particularly in the venture space. That's a big question. Everyone wants to know what are the right metrics to report on. Furthermore, are these good or are these bad? And I'll give you a practical example in the social space. Everyone used to go on like monthly active users until Facebook got so big that there were over 1 billion people on it every single day, and then they shifted to daily. But the definitions, like Facebook's definition of an active user, was wildly different from LinkedIn's. To be an active user on LinkedIn, you only need to log in to the LinkedIn widget. To be an active user on Facebook, you actually have to, hit the app or the Facebook page and platform. So helping companies understand what metrics are right for them is a big part of what we do, because usually we're responsible for driving growth against those metrics. For some it's not active user, for some it's volume of cash processed, for some it's revenue, for many it's ultimately revenue. But helping folks pick the right metrics and make sure they're measuring them appropriately is a big part of what we do.
So what metrics do you use to help them pick the right metrics?
It depends on the business. I think for B2C, in our really, really early stage company, it's all about your cost for acquisition, if there is any cost for acquisition. Ultimately, like a consumer-facing company in the technology space, your value is your audience. So you need to find a way to prove to investors that you can acquire a really valuable audience with little to no money. So that's, in that case, like anything that indicates user interest or demand, or indicates barrier to entry, is a core metric for us. This is where all the standard digital advertising metrics come into play, like your click-through rate, your cost per acquisition, your cost per 1,000 impressions. We don't use those to actually buy media. We use them to measure demand. Which is an interesting hack. Instead of using a focus group where you'll spend $10,000 to $15,000 to have a company, run in a closed and controlled environment a series of questions by potential customers, we'll spend like $30, on Facebook or Instagram or Google, to serve a few thousand impressions to people in the target market and just see how they respond. And use their actual response rates to those advertisements as our indicators. So again, it changes by business. Like the professional service companies are going off a totally different data set. It's quality and value per customer. But whatever makes the most sense for the viability of that business seems to be where we go.
Right. Well, that's very interesting, the way you guys do that. And the beauty of these digital advertising platforms, or outlets, I should say, is that for $30 you can do these tests really cheap, which 30 years ago cost you, $3,000 to do it, if not more.
Yeah. What's extra bizarre, so this is super exciting, but what's bizarre is it's getting so cheap and the race to the bottom has become so fast that platforms that actually syndicate content are beginning to outpace advertisers in terms of reach. So you're going to start, we're going to see a lot more of this in the next year or two, but you're going to start seeing companies abandon, paid digital advertising almost altogether, because it's more efficient to just package and syndicate like really valuable content, and put money into creating that content, instead of actually publishing it and pushing it to reach.
Right. So what's next for you guys? What do you see on the horizon?
So a lot of focus is right there. Helping understand this content game. It's actually not a big part of what we do. I'm not much of a writer. The guys in the team are amazing writers, but we tend to focus the work on, framing content or experiences for the optimal response. So figuring out this content ecosystem is a really big focus. I'll tell you, we have one super stealth stage project in New York. This is one of those pie in the sky, could change the world type things. But what they're actually doing is trying to revolutionize the e-commerce space. So buying products online like you would through a Shopify store or Amazon or eBay. They're building technology that allow digital commerce transactions to take place on any digital touch point or property. So retailers and brands, small or large, aren't beholden to these big, massive tech companies that make their hay by controlling volume, controlling traffic, and restricting access to consumers. So pushing hard to sort of democratize access to digital commerce, and then figure out what this this change in content marketing is going to mean for early stage companies that are trying to grow.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really cool. And do you see yourself continuing to be entrepreneurial and do these types of things? Is that what, as you look into your own crystal ball, your personal crystal ball, what do you see?
Yeah. So you mentioned networking earlier, something all entrepreneurs do. I think I've been super lucky. I've gotten to meet and work with really, really incredible folks. Learn a ton from them, and I found that if you just reach out, I make a goal of reaching out to 5 or 6 new folks every week, actually having conversations with them. The people you meet tend to change your life in one way or another. So, continuing with that, trying to work with as many people as I can, learn as much as I can, is certainly in focus because, there's so many ideas going around. Anything I can attach myself to and help grow, I try to.
Yeah, that sounds great. You brought up networking there and how important that is. If I reflect back on my career, I think I've had somewhere between 12 to 13 different jobs. And during that period of time, I've answered a lot of classified job ads, both in print and digital. And only once did I actually end up getting a job through responding to an ad. All of the other jobs that I've gotten was because I had some type of connection or link into that organization. So that to me is a real demonstration, at least for me, of the value of networking and reaching out and knowing people. And you don't have to go out to dinner with them 3 times a week, but just establish some kind of relationship. And people love to help other people, and don't be bashful about reaching out and giving them a call and say, hey, I'm looking around to do something else. Do you have any suggestions? And certainly for me, it's been a huge part of my life, and it's something that I look at very seriously, and I try to always help people, navigate their way through their various different career decisions that they make. So that's great advice, Nick.
Well, even, outside more advice to extract from you. I think what a lot of early stage founders don't know is how much you still depend on your network and your trusted relationships at the top of the companies that you wind up running. And no experience better than yours as CEO, president. I imagine you still leaned on your network pretty heavily, to form new relationships, new business opportunities, and and drive value. It didn't stop right at job seeking, right?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I was trying to bring it home real personal to folks, but you're absolutely right. It covers all aspects of life when you get down to it.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just your professional career. It's not just your current position or what you're doing as a president or a CEO or a founder or whatever your particular position is to be. It's also true in your personal relationships. It's like meeting people and engaging with people is, I think, a core fundamental value that crosses all aspects of life.
Yeah.
And if you're good at it, boy, does it pay. It pays good dividends. It brings you great returns. And I think you also then have an obligation to pay it forward, right? To keep engaged and to help others as well as they're trying to navigate that morass.
Yeah. So if you'd permit me, I have a little secret project I'd love to share with you.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, it's dead in this vein, but, I was super, super introverted, even all the way through college, probably into my first job. I didn't understand what networking meant and was afraid to approach folks, versus today where, every opportunity I have to help somebody by connecting them to one of the good folks I know, I try to take. But I think as an introvert, or someone who's just not familiar with, the access they could have or the value they could offer someone, it's really hard to take that first step. even just going to an event. What am I going to say? What am I doing? How do I introduce myself? So this has been, I've been working on this for a couple of years with a co-founder down in Florida, but we literally just launched the alpha of a product called Breezler up at that conference in Toronto. And what it does, it's an algorithm that we wrote that understands the strength of your relationships, so you don't have to. And it keeps track of the top 20 folks that you're in touch with, basically creating a trust score. So for someone who's introverted and wants to network but doesn't really know what value they offer or how to position themselves, they don't have to come up with a catchphrase. They don't have to do any of that selling. The app and the technology we built will actually make you valuable by showcasing the relationships you could offer someone else access to. So I, Nick, am not necessarily valuable because of the growth work I can do. I'm valuable because I know Bob, and Bob could be helpful to you in this respect. Basically, we built tech that does all that for you.
Oh, wow. And so you guys just launched this in beta, did you say?
Yeah, I'm calling it an alpha because it's very messy, okay. But it's live on the Apple Store and on Google Play. It does work for Gmail and Microsoft emails. You have to authenticate with email because we can't make connections for folks you don't actually know. But it's patented. It's out there, and we're working hard to validate it in market, establish some traction, and turn it into a real company.
Yeah, and what was the name of it again, Nick?
So Breezler, Breezler.
Okay.
Yeah, I just thought it relevant. We were talking about networking and the power of relationships. I think that's probably the biggest impediment to all the big ideas I come across, probably some that you come across too. Folks have amazing ideas, amazing intent and willpower. They don't have access to the people they need to get their ideas to the next level. So if we could help that,
I think of networking and many of these things as their learned skills.
Yeah.
For some people, it's easier to learn than others, right?
Yeah.
Some people are natural at it. It's like learning music. For some people, it's a real ease, and for other people, it's who are tone deaf like myself, it's really difficult. But it's still you do the 10,000 hours thing, and you can get pretty good. And I think networking is also sort of a learned skill. Yeah. For some people, it's very natural, but for others, you got to work at it. And I went to an engineering school, so I don't, the difference between an introverted and an extroverted engineer, don't you?
No, what's the difference?
The extroverted engineer looks at your shoes while he's talking to you.
Oh man!
So we avoided eye contact, and it's something you overcome some fear, and you figure out how to do it, and it's not all that difficult once you kind of manage your own expectations and fears.
Yeah, I think
so. Cool.
I think what we found was that regardless of where you are, your station in life or physically where you are located, everyone's connected to someone super valuable. So we tried to build tech that could uncover that for you. So without thinking, you could be valuable to anybody just by clicking a button.
Right, exactly. So Nick, we're pushing 40 some odd minutes on this call now. So what other things have I not asked you or we haven't talked about that you'd like to talk about?
I think we've spanned most of my universe, all the way down to sailing in Rhode Island. I think this has been pretty comprehensive.
Well, excellent. Then I think we'll call it a wrap. I will put PinchForth and Breezler into the show notes so people can find that. And thank you very much, Nick, for taking the time to spend with me discussing your background. I really appreciate it, and you've been a wonderful guest for the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope it's interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm excited to be involved with you.
Thanks again, Nick.
Thanks. See ya.
Bela, you were right. Great interview with Nick Petros. What were your thoughts?
So I had a couple. I thought that he had a lot of varied experience, right? So this diversity of experience, which I think is an important element of being a successful entrepreneur. because you oftentimes have to pull together various different aspects from different industries and different types of skill sets in order to build a successful business. The other thing that caught my eye was when he talked about the robotics Lego project that he did in elementary school. And he said that was really a transformational experience for him, where it really opened his eyes into what's possible and the types of things that he could achieve along with his teammates because it was sort of a team project. And I thought it was interesting the way he sort of took that learning experience and that transformational experience and then turned it into his entrepreneurial endeavors.
Very cool. Yeah, I agree. I mean, when I was in school, we didn't have these robotics Legos thing. I mean, we had like cardboard and the fat pencils and the scissors with the rounded edges, so we didn't hurt ourselves. But yeah, it's really cool what kids have access to now. It's been amazing. I have some nieces and nephews and godchildren and things like that, and the things that they are exposed to now is really amazing. So I love how these little threads from when you're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old impact you in his case when he's whatever in his late 20s, early 30s, and in our case when we're have big numbers in front of our age, but it's cool. So yeah, these things work. I loved how he talked about validation as a really important key. He learned the validation lesson the hard way when he was an entrepreneur, and how hard it is when he was talking about his electric car idea and just not having the ability to validate what sounded like a really cool concept. And now he helps people develop validation plans and get to this idea of minimum viable product, which we've talked about before in a podcast on lean startup. That these are really important aspects of the entrepreneurial process, and they are the drivers that get you to funding, right? An idea is great, but a validated idea with a prototype are the things that really get people to think, yeah, I'll buy into this. So I like that a lot of what he does is centered around this idea of validation and viability, and then you connect with the sources of capital. And to me, that's the one of the keys to being successful in this space. What do you think, Bela?
Yeah, I agree, Mike. So if I put on my venture capitalist hat, investing, whether you're a seed stage venture capitalist or an angel investor, whatever space you play in, is all about managing your risk. And what validation really does is it helps to reduce the risk for the investor because you are now presenting more proof, if you will, that your idea or concept, number one, works, and number two, there's some customer interest for it. And those things all sort of reduce risk for the investor. And the more that you can reduce risk for an investor, the more likely they are to invest, and oftentimes at a higher valuation. So both of those things are to your advantage for sure. The other thing that struck me in our conversation was this notion about how we sort of sidetracked a little bit and talked about sailing, but we did have this conversation about how sailing, or oftentimes other competitive sports, not just sailing, where you have to do things as a team. Sometimes you do things as an individual, and at least in sailing, you're trying to get from point A to point B. You have limited resources. You have to deal with the unexpected. You got to do some planning. So it has a lot of business analogies. And one of the questions I have to our listeners is, if they had some thoughts on sort of how sports or competitive nature of those types of activities, whether they be individual or a team, have helped them in their careers. Have they drawn upon those activities and have built on them as their careers have developed?
Well, Bela, have I told you about my sailing experiences?
No.
So I've been on 3 sailing trips. The first sailing trip I went on with my best friend Doug, and Doug will swear this, he will validate this. We are on his uncle's boat, and his uncle just got this unsinkable dinghy that you tow behind the sailboat when you're right. So we take it out. It's maiden voyage, right? Unsinkable dinghy. We loaded up with dinner. We dropped the anchor, and we were going to go to this little island and have a little barbecue for dinner. So we load on the little grill and the hot dogs and the marshmallows and whatever, right? Guess who sunk the unsinkable dinghy? Yep.
Mike Wasserman.
Yep. So that was the first sailing trip. The second sailing trip, many years later, okay, because this was traumatizing for me, right? Second sailing trip, we're in New Zealand and we're sailing on the Tasman Sea. It's beautiful, right? So my friend Dan is a very experienced sailor, and he's sailing the boat, and he's like, "Okay, Mike, I got to go adjust something up front. Just hold this, right?" So I'm holding the tiller, right? And we hit a point that, on reflection, the person at the sailboat rental place kind of told us about this, but we weren't really paying attention. Where you come around a point and the wind shifts really quickly, that's right when he decided to go up front, and I broke the boat. Okay, so that was time number 2. Okay, so yeah, sailing is not in my competency set.
Okay, note to self, Bela, do not invite Mike to go sailing.
Yep, like to be honest about that. But
we'll just stick to podcasting.
If the readers have their own personal stories of success, and that's a lot more uplifting than my ridiculous stories. So we do. Yeah. Sorry, I ruined your whole shtick, didn't I? But it's okay.
No, not at all. I think it was great.
Let's change the name of the podcast from The Unconventional Path to the Unsinkable Dinghy. That could be season 2.
That could be season 2. Yeah, that'll be a big hit.
Yeah.
Hey, one other quick thing about Nick, just to get back to the podcast or our guest, that struck me was I think he talked about a really important thing that he does with the companies he works with, and he said he helps them figure out what their key metrics are. Often when you measure something, you react to it, and you build around it. And if you're measuring the wrong thing, you're often not really improving your business. So this notion of figuring out for your business, the sector that you're in, what are the key metrics that matter to you and to your customer, and then having a laser-like focus on measuring those and tracking them and making sure that they remain pertinent to your business and to your customers, because sometimes these metrics change. I mean, he gave that example of how in the early days of the internet, it used to be eyeballs, right? Number of users. That's all that people cared about. And it drove huge valuations and investments. And then soon people figured out, well, it really doesn't mean all that much. It's not the eyeballs, it's the engagement of those eyeballs. And we start figuring out ways of measuring that engagement and that level of engagement. So I thought that was a really good takeaway from Nick's comments as well.
And we can tie that to a recent podcast with Garrett Howardson, who said, okay, another key is asking the right questions. So once you figure out the right questions to ask, then you add what Nick said. How are you going to measure that, right? What are your key measures and your key benchmarks going to be? Now you start to get the whole picture. So asking the right questions from Garrett Howardson to measuring, getting the right metrics in place from Nick Petros. I like this as a nice kind of overarching philosophy of being a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah, well said, Mike. And I think, with that, why don't we wrap it up? What do you think?
I think we should wrap it up.
All right.
I can wrap it up.
You got it.
Okay. We're happy that you joined us today in our podcasting adventure and learned about my sinking of the unsinkable dinghy. We hope that you found the last hour interesting and thought-provoking, or at least not annoying. We have 2 small requests as usual. First, if you have questions about what we discussed, as we mentioned earlier, please get in touch with us. Our email is, as I said 6 times already, bela.and.mike@gmail.com. And second, more importantly, if you like what we're doing, do us a favor and hit like or subscribe on your podcast app. It's free. To do this takes a second of your time. And if you really want to be radical and write a quick review for us, we'd really appreciate it. If you know others that might find this interesting, please share us with them.
Hey, so thank you for spending time with us today. We really appreciate you listening to our podcast, and we look forward to having you join us for our next episode. We have these episodes come out once a week, and so hope you're with us next week as well. So signing off from upstate New York, this is Bela.
Thanks, Bela. This is great. And from over here in Münster, Germany, I'm going to go get me a schnitzel, I think. All right, so have a great week, and I'll see you in a few days. This podcast is produced for Mike and I by our friends at Busy Media of Schenectady, New York. They can be found at busymedia.co.